Story 1. A man named Tatsuya Ichihashi used plastic surgery to hide his identity while he was wanted for murdering an English teacher named Lindsay Hawker. Ironically, his plastic surgeon was the one who exposed him by providing before and after photos to the police. Story 2. About 10 years ago in Daytona Beach, a man molested a boy. The boy's father caught him in the act and killed him with his bare hands. Story 3. I was waiting at a crosswalk once. The pedestrian sign told me to go. A driver making a right turn sped up to cut in front of me. I had to jump back to avoid getting hit. As the driver passed, he pointed and laughed at me. It's really a shame he was staring at me to mock me because he definitely didn't see the police officer waiting to exit the parking lot right next to me that he cut off. The officer and I both made eye contact before I watched him flip on his lights and promptly pull the driver over. The officer did not look happy. I'm willing to bet that was an expensive ticket. Story 4. A pedophile in my hometown was exposed when he lent out his old camcorder, but forgot he had a tape in it. On the tape was a recording of himself undressing and molesting a 1.5-year-old toddler. He was arrested 2 hours later, and the police found a significant amount of similar content on his computer. He was released pending trial a few weeks later and disappeared. Most people assumed he had fled the country. A few months later, professional divers cleaning up the bottom of the harbor found a car with a corpse in the driver's seat. The windshield was missing, and the corpse was tied to the steering wheel with rope. The local police declared it a clear-cut case of suicide. The national police instructed the local police to investigate the case further, but they did not manage to uncover any evidence of wrongdoing, and people were very pleased with the good work the police had done. Story 5. Jeff Doucette, a Taekwondo instructor, raped a student. The student's father was at the airport when Doucette was being extradited. The father waited by the payphones armed with a pistol. As the police walked by with Doucette, the father shot him on the side of the head, killing him. Story 6. Oskar Dirlewanger, a Nazi war criminal known for his extreme violence during the invasion of Warsaw, was captured in France. Despite wearing civilian clothes, he was recognized and died a few days later due to mistreatment. Story 7. Maya Buzden-Slomik was the commandant of the women's section at Stara Gradiška, a sub-camp within the Jasenovac concentration camp system established by the Ustase, an ultranationalist fascist regime installed in Croatia by Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini in 1941 after the Nazis conquered Yugoslavia. She shot, stabbed, strangled, and tortured women inmates to death. After the war, she tried to hide with her husband, who had also been a camp guard at Stara Gradiška, in either Zagreb or Slovenia. However, a former inmate recognized her and reported them to the Yugoslav secret police, who subsequently arrested them. The trial was swift, and so was the execution. Both she and her husband were executed by either firing squad or hanging. Accounts differ. Their bodies were buried in secret locations that remain undisclosed to this day. Story 8. Honestly, Pablo Escobar. Some of his victims had it worse, but many families smiled when they saw a supposed owner of an entire illegal market and economy die like a dog. Story 9. I was going straight at a traffic light. When the light turned green, I started to move forward. The driver in the oncoming lane was preparing to turn left. He sped in front of me to cut me off and took the turn before I could proceed. He made eye contact and waved his finger in a no gesture, smiling broadly. He found it amusing, but the police officer he rear-ended because he was focused on me did not find it nearly as funny. Story 10. Sam Bankman-Fried and his associates. Leaders of FTX and Alameda, they were stripped of their power, humiliated, and their names are forever tarnished in history. Sam watched in real time as all the people he used to be friends with, hang out with, and care about turned on him to save their own skin. He also observed in real time every one of his lies being dismantled in court. Sam appeared on several podcasts and interviews before his trial. It unfolded something like this. Prosecutor: have you ever said this or done this? Sam: I don't recall. I never said that. Prosecutor: here is video evidence of you saying that. Disgraced, humiliated, and jailed. The end of Bankman-Fried and his associates. He had an interview with Tucker Carlson recently from jail where he pleaded for forgiveness from Donald Trump. He was then placed in solitary confinement afterwards. Story 11. Hitler was experiencing opiate withdrawal and was suffering from a severe methamphetamine comedown as the Soviets closed in on his bunker after he had run out of drugs. Story 12. Robert Pickton, a serial killer who fed his victims' body parts to pigs, died in prison. The man who assaulted him first stabbed him in the neck with a toothbrush and then broke a broom handle. Rick Fry told CTV News on Friday, recounting allegations shared by his lawyer. When you break something like a broom handle, you always get a sharp end, and he took the sharp end and stuck it into his nose, up into his skull. Story 13. Bill Cosby. The prison time he received is justified. His legacy has been shattered, and his work has vanished from the public sphere. His characters are tarnished, and his voice has been silenced. In 10 years, he will hold no cultural significance, only memories of his wrongdoing. His eulogies will focus on his disgrace, and his name will likely be forgotten. Story 14. Hamza al-Bashani was an Egyptian army officer during President Gamal Abdel Nasser's reign. He was notorious for the brutal methods of torture and abuse he inflicted on prisoners. In the end, he died in a car accident, where his body was severely mutilated by steel bars. There was also a rumor that his skull was used as an ashtray in a famous doctor's house. His demise and the rumors surrounding him reveal much about the kind of person he was. Story 15. Stalin created a climate of terror so strong that no one would ever question him. One day he had not come out of his office for hours, but no one dared to disturb him. When finally someone entered the room, they discovered that he had been lying on the floor for hours in agony, and he died soon after. Someone else mentioned Gaddafi and Mussolini, who certainly got what was coming to them, but Stalin's death always seemed more fitting. He could have been saved if he had not instilled so much paranoia in those around him. Story 16. Reinhard Heydrich was one of the most notorious figures in the Schutzstaffel and played a significant role in the organization and execution of the Holocaust at various stages. He was injured by a grenade thrown by Czech rebels and died slowly over the course of a week from sepsis. In retaliation, the Nazis killed around 1,000 civilians, which was typical of their brutal methods. Story 17. My difficult boss experienced a significant life change when his fiancée left him and took their children. He lost his job, where he was earning twice my salary while contributing little. After suffering a heart attack due to years of substance abuse, he appears to have made positive changes. Health-wise, he seems to be okay now and is on a better path. Story 18. Yolanda Saldivar shot and killed Selena Quintanilla. Yolanda will forever remain in prison, and she knows it. Story 19. Roy Cohn was a lawyer who played a significant role in McCarthyism and the Lavender Scare. He later became very wealthy as a fixer for the rich and powerful. He worked for Donald Trump in the 1970s, introduced Rupert Murdoch to Ronald Reagan, and faced multiple indictments for crimes such as extortion and blackmail, though none were ever successfully prosecuted. There is a clear connection between Cohn and the modern Republican Party. Roy Cohn was also a closeted homosexual who refused to acknowledge his sexuality while betraying many other gay men. He contracted AIDS in 1984, was disbarred in 1986 for attempting to persuade a dying client to sign over his estate, and died a few weeks later alone, claiming he was actually suffering from liver cancer all along. Upon his death, the Internal Revenue Service seized most of his estate due to the significant tax debt he owed. Story 20. Many have heard the story of Helen Hulick, the woman who was jailed for wearing pants to testify in court in 1938, a significant step towards equality. However, did you know that Judge Garin, who sentenced her to jail, later appeared on television to argue against the emerging scientific proposition that homosexuality is not a choice? He became so incensed that he suffered a stroke while on air. Story 21. Theodore Robert Bundy could have gotten worse, but I believe the death penalty was effective, considering it was the most severe punishment the United States could legally impose. Story 22. My ex was verbally, sexually, mentally, and emotionally abusive. He terrorized me. He also had diabetes and never took care of himself. He lost sight in one eye and lost 2 toes, so you tell me who won. Story 23. One of the United Kingdom's most prolific pedophiles, Richard Huckle, was murdered by a fellow inmate named Paul Fitzgerald. Story 24. The man recently executed by firing squad in North Carolina, or possibly South Carolina, was not punished for the execution of the store clerk he robbed but for the cellmate he tortured to death. Supposedly, only 2 bullets hit him in the lungs and nowhere else, so he drowned in his own blood for a few minutes. Story 25. Maybe not evil, but the conspiracy theorist who was punched by Buzz Aldrin after calling him a coward and a liar definitely deserved it. Story 26. It is not everything he deserved, but Hitler watched his attempt at conquest fail and backfire before taking a cowardly exit. His name is now synonymous with evil forever. He deserved much more, but it is a small measure of justice that he suffered humiliating failure before he died. Story 27. The driver who cut me off was promptly collided with by an elderly woman who mistook the gas pedal for the brake. Karma is a beautiful thing. Story 28. Thomas Midgley, the inventor of leaded gasoline and chlorofluorocarbons, was strangled to death by one of his own inventions. Story 29. Jeffrey Doucette was abducted and sexually abused as a child. His father shot him while the police were escorting him. Story 30. I feel like I should put a warning. This post involves animal cruelty and death involving both animals and a person. I feel bad for saying this is what they deserve, but in elementary school, I knew someone who liked to harm animals. I don't mean I knew them as if we were friends. I heard horrific stories about them. This person grew up attending the same schools as me, and throughout all of school, they were still obsessed with killing animals in horrific ways. Recently, I wondered what happened to them and asked a close friend, who informed me that they had been working at a winery and were killed by one of the juicing machines. It is quite horrific, but it reflects how the animals must have felt. Story 31. The person who screamed at me for pulling off the side of the road to try to get a dog that was running in the middle of the road. I was trying to get the puppy off the road, and this man slowed down just to yell, "Get out of the road! It's just a dog." Mind you, there were at least 3 other cars pulled over with people trying to help. I believe he yelled at a few of them too. He drove off and we got the dog back to its yard. Thank goodness the owner came out. I got back into my car and continued on my way. Not even a mile away, I saw the same guy in his truck broken down on the side of the road. I just drove right past, laughing. He got his karma, and the universe gifted me the chance to witness it. Story 32. To an extent, Joseph Mengele had a heart attack while swimming and drowned. I wish he could have suffered more, but at least he did not die peacefully. Story 33. Nathan Matthews, the killer of Becky Watts, was attacked in prison with a jug of boiling butter. Huntley was also repeatedly attacked. Story 34. Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, was stabbed to death by one of his own in Parliament. Story 35. I think of Harvey Weinstein. Took too long, but seeing him finally face consequences gives me a bit of hope that justice can eventually catch up. It is still upsetting how many people stayed silent, though. Story 36. Not very confident this is true, but supposedly, the inventor of the Brazen Bull was able to conduct its test run. Story 37. My uncle, by marriage, abandoned his wife, my maternal aunt, and their children to travel the world with another woman. Not long after this, he became ill, and it was discovered that he had liver cancer that had metastasized. The woman left him, and he died alone in a foreign country, with no one by his side in the end. It may seem harsh to say he deserved this fate, but he also transmitted hepatitis C to my aunt, which caused her to die young and leave their children orphaned. Story 38. A woman on one of my favorite reality shows was abused as a child, and years later, her abuser was hit by a bus right in front of her. Story 39. The man who raped and killed a little girl named Katie Coleman was in jail when her cousin was sent there, and he carved Katie's revenge on the man's forehead. Another individual, Mel Ignato, photographed himself murdering a woman. He was acquitted, and sometime later the photos were found, but nothing could be done due to double jeopardy. He died alone from a heart attack after falling through his coffee table. Additionally, there is Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, who killed his wife and 2 daughters but was found not guilty in a military court. After appearing on talk shows and enjoying his newfound fame, new evidence was discovered, leading to another trial which was non-military and circumvented double jeopardy. He was ultimately sentenced to life in prison. Story 40. Earl Bradley, the pediatrician in Delaware who committed sexual offenses against his patients, including toddlers, is unlikely to ever be released from prison. Story 41. Charles II, known as the Bad of Navarre, was notorious for betraying his allies multiple times. He arranged the assassination of political opponents, opened the prisons in Paris to incite anarchy, and was generally despised by many. He ultimately met a tragic end when he was set on fire while wrapped in linens soaked in brandy to treat an illness. Story 42. Ronald Wilson Reagan died slowly from Alzheimer's disease after cutting aid for mental health and ignoring the AIDS epidemic. Story 43. The man who assaulted my sister and me choked to death on his own vomit. Another individual who hurt me died of cancer. 2 men who caused me deep pain also passed away from cancer. My mother, who never wanted me and treated me as a scapegoat, suffered a massive stroke that left her in a vulnerable state. Story 44. Leona Helmsley, known as the Queen of Mean, served time in prison house arrest for tax evasion. One of her famous quotes was, "We don't pay taxes, only the little people pay taxes." Story 45. 50 years ago at my camp, a counselor molested a camper. The head of camp, the founder's son, was informed by the boy. He consoled the boy, then got up and drove away, pulling up in his pickup to the field where the counselor was running an activity. He said, "Get in." They drove in silence for hours, deep into the Maine wilderness on logging roads. After hours and countless miles of silence, the head of camp told the counselor to get out of the car. From the window, he informed the counselor that the boy had told him everything. Then he drove away, leaving the counselor in the dark middle of nowhere. No one ever saw or heard from the counselor again. They will never find him. Story 46. The high school bully who broke my wrist over a basketball game. 10 years later, I saw him pumping gas at a convenience store while I was picking up champagne for my promotion. Story 47. Mel Ignato tied his soon-to-be ex-fiancée to a glass coffee table, assaulted and killed her. He avoided conviction, despite a confession from his accomplice and photographic evidence that was discovered later. They managed to charge him with perjury after discovering the photos, but it didn't feel like justice. Years later, old and alone in his apartment, he fell onto a glass table and bled out. Story 48. Rudolf Haas, the commandant of Auschwitz, was hanged between the back of his garden wall and the crematorium in Auschwitz. Story 49. I have wronged many people and made numerous mistakes while growing up. Now, at 24, I feel unhappy, financially unstable, and without friends. Story 50. I was driving on a road well known as a speed trap. I was going the speed limit, and a car behind me kept approaching, slowing down, and then speeding up again. After about 3 instances of this aggressive behavior to make me speed up, the police officer behind him turned on his lights and pulled him over. Story 51. My childhood bully. Throughout my kindergarten and elementary school years, there was a kid named Tyler who bullied me relentlessly. He kept getting into trouble, but not enough to make him stop. When my first elementary school closed, I spent my last 2 years at a different school. At this new school, Tyler threatened to beat me up when we encountered each other. I reported the incident to a teacher who involved the principal. Tyler got into serious trouble with the principal, which resulted in him being pulled from regular classes, and he never spoke to me again. Eventually, he was expelled for another reason that I don't know about. Last I heard from a friend who used to be close to him, he got arrested for threatening someone with a knife, never finished high school due to repeated expulsions, and is now struggling with addiction. Story 52. Years ago, I was driving on the 241 toll road in California, and it merges into State Highway 91. I needed to take the first exit. Highway 91 was congested, and traffic was barely moving. I turned on my signal and patiently maneuvered through 4 lanes while waving to the nice people who let me change lanes. Sitting in a red convertible at the exit was a blonde woman who, no matter how much I waved at her, would not let me exit. I lowered my passenger side window to ask her nicely, but she just yelled something I couldn't understand. My wife was in the passenger seat, so she started talking to the woman politely, but the woman still would not let us cut in front of her. At that point, my lane began to move, and I had to give up the exit. The woman continued yelling at my wife, but her lane did not move. The driver in the Bentley in front of her was not happy. Story 53. Pretty much every soldier responsible for the Nanjing massacre was found guilty in the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. The beheading competition trial is a perfect example. Story 54. We had a racist individual in my high school who directly insulted someone. He was quickly confronted by many students nearby. Some even spat at him while he lay there bloodied and bruised. After that, he was ostracized by most of the school right up until graduation. Now that individual is a sheriff's deputy, which may not be the best outcome after all. Story 55. Most of the Nazi leaders who were executed after the Nuremberg trials faced severe mishandling. The executioner provided by the United States Army was incompetent and botched many of the hangings, resulting in suffocation instead of death by broken necks. One execution took 28 minutes. Additionally, the trapdoor was too small, causing some of the individuals to hit their heads on the floor during the fall. It seems this was not intentional on the Army's part, but rather a result of having an unqualified person in charge. Story 56. In high school, there was a track athlete who regularly bullied a student with autism. The student and his mother spent months trying to get the school to investigate, but the athlete had a scholarship and was favored by the administration. The student with autism had an uncle who was a member of a white supremacist biker gang. They tracked down the athlete after school and chased him into an alley, where they severely injured him with a bike chain and broke his knee with a baseball bat. By the time authorities arrived, the bikers had left the city and were heading to another state. As a result of his injuries, the athlete was unable to continue participating in track, and his scholarship was revoked. Story 57. Antonio Cosme, a Spanish rapist, raped a 13-year-old girl and spent 7 years in prison. When he was released, he encountered his victim's mother and, laughing at her, asked, "How is your daughter?" The mother said nothing. She left to buy gasoline and matches. She returned to where he was, poured gasoline over him, and set him on fire. The mother went to prison, but no one really blamed her for what she did, and many women felt he didn't suffer enough. She was released on parole in 2017 after serving 3 years of her sentence. Story 58. My father was a homicide detective in the 1970s, and he shared a case with me where the universe served its comeuppance. A particular perpetrator had raped and murdered a teenage girl and likely others. Despite significant evidence, there was never a smoking gun, and his counsel managed to suppress some of the most damning evidence, leading the district attorney to decline prosecution. This continued for several years, and the perpetrator taunted the police. He had a near-constant tail and made comments to the officers about hypothetical crimes. He mentioned the women in their lives if he knew they existed, using winks and finger guns. He was truly despicable. Fast forward approximately 8 years, and my father is now an attorney focused on civil litigation and criminal defense. He took on a client, a truck driver who was dealing with workers' compensation and insurance claims after accidentally hitting and killing a motorcyclist. The motorcyclist lost control and went right under the truck. While I don't remember the specifics, it was clear that there was very little left of him. The truck driver was understandably distraught and struggled with the fact that he had killed someone. Partway through the case, he called my father to report something strange. A series of anonymous deliveries of expensive bottles of scotch and other gifts had appeared on his doorstep. Apparently, word had spread among the police force, and the detectives who worked on the case, along with a retired police chief, were sending the driver thank you presents for finally eliminating this monster from the planet. Story 59. Oskar Dirlewanger, nicknamed the Butcher Executioner of the Warsaw Uprising, was the commander of the Dirlewanger Brigade, which was one of the most sadistically brutal groups in the entire Waffen-SS. His list of crimes against humanity would make Pol Pot blush. Fortunately for the world, He was mysteriously bludgeoned to death by Polish soldiers and former prisoners after being captured while committing treachery. The legacy of such a Nazi is one of pure evil. If you read about him, be prepared to be absolutely disgusted. Story 60. My now ex-friend would abuse me physically, sexually, and emotionally. I endured this for 10 years. I cut him off, and about 2 years later, I saw him at my local grocery store. He is now balding, and to try to cover it up, he grew his hair out, which made it look worse. He also has a beard that resembles pubic hair. I am not kidding. I was almost jumping for joy when I saw him. Story 61. Muammar Gaddafi, a brutal dictator and war criminal receiving support from the people of Libya, feels like a form of justice. Story 62. None of them that I know of anyway. What an evil person deserves is to be instantly punished after committing their first evil act, but most go on doing terrible things for years before being punished, if they ever are. Story 63. I think about Jeffrey Epstein. He was a wealthy financier who abused countless young girls over decades, using his power to silence victims. His crimes were horrific, and he evaded justice for years. In 2019, he was finally arrested and faced serious charges. While awaiting trial, he died in his cell, officially ruled a suicide. Many believe it was justice catching up in one way or another. His death ended his ability to harm others and exposed a network of enablers. It felt like the world exhaled when he was gone. Story 64. A driver in a brand new Camaro, V8 and loud, ran a red light. Actually several. I was on the sidewalk making my way to the crossing to get to my car when I heard the loud engine and only saw exhaust as they sped past me. I was on the road heading to the freeway when traffic started to slow down to a crawl. Eventually, we had to merge into one lane to navigate around a bend. That's when I saw all the emergency vehicles surrounding a car that was smashed to pieces. It was the same black and yellow Camaro from earlier. There was no way anyone survived that. Story 65. Ken McElroy was a notorious figure whose actions led the entire town to conspire in his disappearance. During the investigation, the community remained tight-lipped. Many YouTubers, documentaries, and at least one movie have been made about him. Story 66. Oscar Pistorius dodged a murder charge and received a lesser conviction. He attempted to appeal this decision but ended up being charged with murder. Story 67. Paralaus of Athens, the man who invented the brazen bull, became a victim of his own creation and was thrown off a cliff. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.